In today's class, we're going to be talking about trade relations in Native North America and First Contacts, a continuation of some of the things we discussed last week. Today, we're going to start out really with the purchase of Manhattan. This is one of the more important founding myths in North American history, and it provides a crucial way for us to think about early contact and encounter and what Native peoples and Europeans believed they were doing as they entered into relationships with one another. Now, we discussed this previously. The purchase of Manhattan as a founding myth for America has a particular resonance. But one of the key things that I think this story does is it symbolizes an idea of American Indians and really Native North America as being uncivilized and essentially unsettled. That's the mythology, and we'll go back to that in terms of some of the readings this week, both the readings that discuss the original Dutch relationship with Indian peoples and the so-called purchase of Manhattan, but also readings that might seem odd, like John Locke, who theorizes ideas about property, political sovereignty, and the social contract between a government and its people, largely in terms of thinking about the new world that the Europeans have discovered in North America. So as I said, Manhattan represents this sort of mythology, an idea about America. And this idea that we've discussed in previous classes is that the Indians make a silly purchase. So on some levels, this is buying a Manhattan representing Indian gullibility or lack of sophistication, but also there's a larger meaning in the sense that Indians don't have a settled space. The purchase of Manhattan seems like such a folly in part because of this. New York City. New York City didn't exist as New York City when the Dutch negotiated their entry onto this island. It was in fact a swampy, low-lying terrain. It only seems so silly now that you got this for so many guilders or $20-odd worth of trade goods because we know what Manhattan has become. That isn't to say that Manhattan, however, was not important. When the Dutch, namely Peter Minuit, purchased this island, although it wasn't really a purchase so much as entering into an agreement with the Delaware or Lenni Lenape peoples who inhabited the island. He did so on behalf of the Dutch West India Company. Now, the Dutch were emerging in the early Atlantic world as one of the premier trading powers in Western Europe. And in fact, they carried the vast majority of trade goods that circulated between Africa, North America, and Europe. So their purchase of Manhattan, or their entering into a relationship with native peoples in Manhattan, was designed to give them a North American base for what was emerging as a really lucrative trade in furs. And that is one of the things that helps to explain the relationship entered into by the people, Lenni Lenape or Delaware, and the Dutch West India Company. Here's another image of Manhattan. We can see the Manhattan as an island intersected by a river, East River and the Hudson's Bay River. Now, this is where Peter Minuit is from. It's Antwerp, the city of Antwerp in Belgium. Minuit, in fact, is a Walloon-speaking or Flemish-speaking citizen of the Netherlands who's become involved in the trade in part like the pilgrims who leave Africa. These are Protestant dissenters. In this case, he's seeking to get free of Spanish oppression in the New World. When they come to North America and enter into this relationship with the Delaware Indians, it is in part because they are trying to capitalize, as I said, on a growing and increasingly important fur trade. As you can see these rivers, the Hudson's Bay, the Hudson River that connects here at the tip of Long Island, what would now be Manhattan, the Delaware River that drains here. This is another, between the Hudson River and the Delaware River, is the territory occupied by the Lenni Lenape or the Delaware. This is a coalition of native peoples, not unlike the Wampanoag. They later will be called the Munsee and the Unami, but they are interlocked villages like the Wampanoag, and they exist and control trade that moves through these watersheds. Most importantly, crucially, the Susquehanna River here, which drains into the watershed of the Delaware River, the Hudson watershed, which also drains into the Long Island Sound. Both these watersheds move deep into the interior, as you can see following up to what would now be present-day Albany, where you have a connection with the Mohawk River that goes all the way out to the west in Lake Ontario, and the Susquehanna goes up to the Finger Lakes and what would now be upstate New York. So controlling these river mouths for the Delaware Indians put them at the end of long networks of trade. Trade goods, peoples, and things move up and down river systems in early North America. And in this case, we have a burgeoning trade of furs for manufactured goods. The Delaware, in securing a relationship with the Dutch, put themselves in a direct, ongoing, sustained relationship with the suppliers of most of the manufactured metal goods that are circulating in the interior. So this move is very strategic on their part. It is what we've talked about in previous classes, the coming together of native North America and the Atlantic world. So in part, when the Delaware make this relationship with the Dutch, they're attempting to gain a foothold into the Atlantic world. The Dutch similarly are attempting to get a foothold in native North America. And while it seems from the story that the Dutch are the people with the power, that isn't necessarily the case. And in fact, while the Dutch do have something that the Delaware want, that is access to trade goods, they have to enter into a relationship that is essentially crafted and shaped by the native peoples who live in North America. And this is exactly the situation that the Dutch find themselves in. They expand their settlement, both in Manhattan, and then in the 1620s, they create Albany, a trading post at the junction of the Hudson River and the Mohawk River, which gives them access to all the furs coming from the interior, the Great Lakes, that make their way through the Great Lakes water systems onto the Mohawk River to the Hudson Bay, and then down into Manhattan, or through the Great Lakes to the Susquehanna River down to the Delaware Bay. Both these are vital trade routes that connect the Dutch to the interior through their relationship with the Lenni Lenape, or the Delaware Indians. However, shortly after this relationship is established, the Delaware end up losing what ends up being a crucial political struggle for control of really the entire eastern seaboard with the Iroquois Confederacy. That is the Mohawk at the eastern door, the Oneida, the Onondaga, and the Cayuga and the Seneca. The original 5 nations, later to 6 when the Tuscarora joined the Confederacy in the 18th century. These native peoples stretch out from essentially the Mohawk River, Hudson's Bay corridor in the east to Lake Erie in the west. At the time that the Dutch establish Albany in the north, the Delaware are engaged in a conflict with their Mohican allies against the Mohawk. They end up, long story short, losing that conflict, and the Mohawk end up asserting control over this trade relationship and really over the relationship with the Dutch by virtue of controlling access to the waterways that allow European traders to trade with Indians from the interior who are processing furs. So the Iroquois Confederacy essentially becomes an extremely important unit in terms of early American history, in part because they're a confederacy that linked 5 different nations that allowed them to act politically in coordinated ways that smaller, more village-centric communities like the Wampanoag and the Dutch cannot. They can mobilize all 5 nations for warfare. They act in a confederated manner. They can pursue trade policies and military policies as a confederacy. And this gives them considerable advantage with their native competitors, and it also makes them very valuable allies for Europeans. So the Dutch very quickly shift their relationships from the Delaware to the Iroquois Confederacy and the Mohawk specifically, establishing what they call, and which we'll read about, the covenant chain. That is a relationship that binds the Confederacy in the interior of North America with Dutch merchant traders at the coast. This relationship underscores some really important ideas for this class, namely the importance of intercultural contact in shaping sort of social identity and politics, and the importance also of war as an agent of change. All these rapid changes that are happening, Dutch relationship with the Delaware loss of political and physical control of ground to the Mohawk and the Iroquois Confederacy are all driven by conflict in an attempt to control relationships between Indians and Europeans. So warfare will very much act throughout this early period of North American history as an agent for change. Also, this story emphasizes the significance of alliance making and the need for Europeans to interact with native peoples often on their own terms. The fur trade might seem like a sort of process whereby native peoples are exchanging valuable furs for invaluable goods. For example, the idea that Manhattan was purchased for baubles or trinkets. However, really what we need to think about is exchange and fur trade exchange operating on a continuum basis. That is, there is already the circulation of beadwork in Native American societies, and these circulation of things like this, the wampum strand made from whelk and quahogs, and beat together into strands that are called wampum, that are presented as belts, and often that are presented by virtue of creating alliance relationships. Purple wampum is symbolic of warfare. White wampum is symbolic of peace. This exchange of wampum between native peoples was considered a sort of signifier of accepting and entering into ongoing relationships. So very quickly, things like trade goods or manufactured goods, beads, glassware, etc., circulate, but not as extraordinary things that people haven't necessarily had access to, but also because they become intertwined with existing exchange practices. In the same sense, the fur trade very much develops as part of existing relationships. Native people don't are engaged in fur trade as a way of creating ongoing relationships. So it's not just the economic value that they gain from exchanging goods, but also the creation of a relationship between different peoples. The exchange of goods, trade goods for furs, for example, ends up being a part of the process of creating ongoing relationship. The need to establish a sort of friendly uh, default relationship that makes it safe to trade, as opposed to a situation where you might exchange with enemies, which would be more prone toward hostility, toward theft, possibly outright provocation and warfare. So the nature of trade relationships are predicated on whether or not people have an alliance-like relationship that is a peaceful, ongoing relationship, or one that is adversarial. And an adversarial relationship can operate along a continuum from outright warfare to just theft and dishonesty. So the nature of relationships that emerge in early North America in and around the fur trade very much occur in this same context. That is, in the context of how Native peoples understand their own communities and their relationship between their communities and other Native communities. And Europeans are quickly folded into this. They become part of the alliance-making process by which the Iroquois form a confederation and force the subordination of people like the Dutch or the Delaware. Um, and the Dutch enter into the same relationship largely on native terms. That is, they accept that their exchange of goods will either operate on a continuum, either peaceful exchange symbolizing an ongoing relationship, or possibly hostile change, which means that they are potentially enemies. So this sort of continuum of exchange, the linking of exchange with political alliances, all these things are things that are standard for Native North America, and that Europeans very quickly adapt themselves to. So you see, when we started out with something as simple as the purchase of Manhattan, we can actually unpack that story and really get to a lot of meaning and a lot of understanding about how early relations in North America are unfolding. We'll talk about this in class, in and around the discussion of purchase of Manhattan, early Dutch relationships, but also larger, broad concepts about property, civilization, uncivilized, savagery versus civilization, things that really shape American and American Indian relationships from first contact into the 20th century. I'll talk to you on Tuesday. Bye bye.